Hello and welcome to Human Caring. Today I have the pleasure to talk with Professor Ehud Ahissar. Ehud Ahissar is a professor of neurobiology, brain scientist, leading a laboratory in the Weismann Institute of Science in Israel. Welcome, Ehud.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning. Professor Ahissar, when I looked at the work you're doing in the laboratory, what catch my attention immediately is the title of the laboratory you're leading, which is called the Embodiment of Preception. And for me, embodiment is a term that belongs to different areas of life. And most of all, for me, it resonates with body-mind, with being within the body. Maybe you can, what is your take on embodiment of perception?
Okay, the embodiment of perception emphasizes the fact that when we perceive the world, we perceive it via our body, the entire body. There is a notion since the era of brain research emerged in the last century, kind of the idea of a brain in a jar or something like this, that we have a brain and the brain perceives for us or something like this, that people still talk in this manner. When you look at the system, it cannot work like this. It's what we have is we have a body that perceives, and part of the body are neurons. Part of the neurons, they make a brain. They make very sophisticated brains, which are highly connected collection of neurons. And there are a lot of processes going there, but these processes are meaningless unless they are connected to the body when we talk about perception. And the major reason maybe is that perception has to do with the external world. The engagement with the external world is via the body, mostly the sensory organs, the eyes, the hands, the nose. But everything, you know, when you perceive, let's say the world, usually you move your head, you walk around, you talk, okay, you activate everything. This is part of the perceptual process is part of this living. Entirely, and it's not an isolated faculty of the brain.
That's very interesting because, you know, there is this term when I studied called the biological, psychological, social model, and which kind of describing what I hear you describing, that we all the time in relationship, there is always relationship between us as an organism and the world outside of us. But yet it seems like we experience the world as separate, that we're not really aware of all this kind of dance that's going on between our body, our environment, our thoughts, our emotion, but actually it's one movement, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah. This notion of the world out there and we inside, like separated things, I think it emerges from since the kind of invention of language and the communication between people. That takes kind of makes an abstraction of terms, and then we say, okay, a bottle, and I have a name for it, and I kind of detach it as a separate thing. This is very useful for communicating, but it's at least a little misleading when we come to think about what is actually the relationship between us and the world. And when you look at any way you look at it, through physics, you know, if you just take a look, narrower looks at the atoms here, or electrons, or chemistry, or biology, you see that we are actually a continuum. Basically, there is a continuum with some, you know, emerging bodies like us that behave in the world, but there is no separation. We cannot say, okay, you know, sometimes, specifically even in physics, we talk about ourselves as kind of a point observer that observe the world somehow, you know, from a detached point. There's nothing like this when you look at the world. We are part of the world in anything that we do, including perception.
This is really interesting. I mean, in a way, for me, what you're saying is connecting science in the West as we slowly, gradually learn to understand, and kind of in all traditions from East that kind of tell us that we are connected, but somehow we do not experience it, but the potential that we have in us is more and more to understand ourselves in a context as a potential to in a way to learn more about ourselves learning more about the way we operate, and maybe also have a different kind of relationship to nature or to other people. And it seems like we kind of stop in the West. We understand that, but yet there's
the dualism. Yes, I call it dual. I mean, we are dualistic. I think in nature we are dualistic, and to me, it's mostly because of these two domains. What we call in the lab the brain-world domain, which is the continuum that we experience with the world, and the brain-brain domain, like what we do now, that we use words, categorized words with specific meanings, sort of deterministic, to describe the world. So we have this dual way of living, the talking about things and perceiving or behaving with things. And this is what gives us this kind of confusion running between these idealized, separated entities and connected entities.
You said something before that, you know, as a body therapist and yoga instructor and, you know, the whole world of embodiment, the way I understand it makes a lot of sense. You said that everything is kind of a flow of a movement. And I think that it's happened very often that we get stuck. And you can see it in the body, you can see it in the breath, you can see it in a rumination of a certain thought, of emotion. And when I was again looking at your work, I saw that you have this theory of the closed loop theory. Maybe you can tell something about that.
Yeah, it's a very interesting point. So indeed, this issue of dynamic versus static world or behavior or perception, whatever you take it, is an issue that runs from the Greek time and probably even earlier. Until today, that people kind of treat, it's again another face of this dualism. People treat the world either as static or dynamic, and I'll tell you what I mean. The static view means that you can have states in the world, like in a computer, you can have a state and define, I'm now in state A, and now I move to state B, and maybe I can even store state A somewhere and then come back to it or restore it or something like this. And that this is the static view. The dynamic view says that there are no such states. There's no way you can stop the kind of freeze or divide the world, the happening in the world to time slots or special slots to say this is a state. Everything is connected and everything is dynamic. So everything is on the motion, on the move all the time. The more I look at the world from the research point of view, but also in life, I'm convinced that we live in a dynamic world. There's no way you can, stop and talk about separate minutes or something like this. Everything is dynamic, but within these dynamics, what we see, what we observe is that we all have, in all the levels of processes, we have this convergence to so-called steady state. So you come close to kind of what you call engagement or something that you are more focused at for a while, and then you leave it and jump to something else. This is true for all levels of life in the phenomena that we study, which is perception. You see it, for example, I'll give you an example. When you perceive something with your eyes, then we have two kind of types of eye movements. One is called saccades. And for example, when I look at your face, I can saccade from one eye to the other eye, to the nose, etc. And by this saccading, I move the high resolution part of my retina, of my visual part, to separate points that I looked at. The size is very small. It's 2 degrees of angle of vision, something like the width of my thumb when I just stretch my arm. It's so small compared to what we perceive. So I must jump my eye in order to perceive in high resolution. And then whenever you jump there, you have some kind of focusing on what you see there. There's a process that reveals what is seen in this focal point. So you keep jumping from place to place and then converging and understanding what's there. Jumping and converging, jumping, converging. If you look at the mouse, laboratory mouse, just put it in arena, it runs and stops and sniffs and touches. Run and stop and sniff and touches. If you use your hands and you try to feel something, you do the same. And now if you extend it to our life, I guess it's not something that we studied, but if you extend it to your life, it's the same. You move fast from point to point, let's say from my home to my work, come here, and now I'm dwelling here, studying what's going on, talking to you. And then this will be done. We'll get bored. We said everything we had to say. Then we move to another place and then do another thing there. So life is a kind of connection. It's not a uniform dynamics. It seems like a kind of jumping and dwelling between places.
So from what you're saying, what I understand is there, our attention get captured by the present situation, and we get identified by it, and then we forget everything else.
Yes, and it's active. It's not that it gets attracted somehow. We are part of it. So it's the closed loop thing here works all the way, because the reason I came here is because I wanted to come here and talk to you. And next to it, I will want, maybe I planned it ahead, so I plan to go to another place and to do some other thing. I'm part of it. It's not that I'm passive and I'm letting the world attract me to places. I'm part of the game. So it's another closed loop game between me and the world, in which I find myself jumping and dwelling from task to task or place to place.
It's very interesting what you're saying, because, it's one thing that I choose to bring myself to this situation, but at the situation itself, it's like there are many things that try to capture my attention, and it's really the man to be aware of what is it catching my attention, and then there is a possibility to kind of voluntarily bring it back to what is going on, because yes. Otherwise, like a mouse, I'm going there, and if I want to kind of bring it down to earth, to human life, it seems like that we process insights, our thoughts that we're very occupied with, kind of involuntary can catch our attention, kind of creating a story of what's going on now. And by that, we are not seeing the situation as it is, because the situation stimulates an association, for example, and then I'm captured by that. And why I think it's important, because you talked before about that perception got to do with our body, that their situation itself is kind of communicating, my body communicating with it. I perceive what's going on, but my attention is involuntarily getting caught by something that perhaps got nothing to do with the situation. And it might affect the way I see the situation. And I think it's very important, especially in cases of, if we talk about, again, about human life, about depressions, about the PTSD, about stress, about many, many aspects of our life. What will you say about that?
Yeah, so there are many things that you said here. I'll take one of them, which is kind of the balance. So I said it's a balanced game between us and the world. Let's take one individual, let's take me, and for example, and I'm balanced with the world. There are some things in the world that attract me, and I react to them. Either I go there or I have stronger attractors, and it's a balance between what's happening in me, mostly in my brain, and what happens in the world. What you talk about, people who sometimes are catched in their thoughts and cannot don't attend to anything outside because they're caught up with their thoughts, sounds like an imbalance between the two sources of information, so to speak, the internal one and the external one. And it probably has to do a lot with, so we said we have a closed loop, okay, where we have, let's say we divide the world to outside and inside, and we have a closed loop between the two. So in order for the two to be balanced, you must have these links active. When they are impaired and when they are not enough active, then you may be locked in your thoughts. And usually it goes with kind of indeed decrease in the level of activity, because there's no activity, you don't search for anything. And this is a known attractor in the field. So attractor is something that you, or steady state or set point, these are theoretical terms to describe a situation in which you are in a place and everything you do, if you don't invest too much energy, the conditions will bring you back to this attractor. This is why it's called attractor. So it's some condition of the system that attracts you back to its center, so to speak. And very low activity is a kind of attractor, because you say there's no activity, you do some activity, immediately the system takes you back to the no activity state. You need a lot, you need to cross some energy barrier, invest a lot of energy to get to another attractor. And in this case, if indeed this close loops between the individual and the world are malfunctioning, and is locked in the internal state, then you must invest a lot of effort, of energy in this link. So activate them, and this kind of initiate actions and movements and attempts to be engaged with the external world in order to cross this energy barrier.
It's very fascinating. I think I'll try now to kind of, the way I hear what you're saying, to put it into words, that, and correct me if I'm wrong, when you say there is low activity in the situation, it seems like, from what I know, and I absolutely not an expert, that there is the same neural path that being activated in the situation, a kind of a closed loop, and it's usually just a little bit of the entire situation. It might be the same thought, it might be the same feeling or the same area of pain. And to be engaged, as I hear you saying, is in a way to become more, to kind of include a more source of information to the situation that will increase the activity. That means to create new neural connections.
Yes, but it must be in the direction of the interaction with the world.
Yes.
Otherwise, you still get stuck in yourself. So the investment of energy must be in the interactions with the world. Do something that does something to the world.
But the interaction of the world, as you said before, we can only experience it through our body, in a way. So the more I pay attention...
The link is the body. The link here is the body. I mean, thoughts, you cannot, just by talking, you cannot do it. Let's say this is the message from here. I'm not expert in depression, so I'll not, try to solve depression here. But from my point of view of this closed loop perception, etc., it's consistent with the situation in which you are locked in only kind of internal activity. And in order to get from it and to be active and to be engaged with the world, you must activate the bodily pathways to the world. If you just talk, and just try to convince by talking, not much will happen here. You must be active.
And I think it's important to kind of stay a little bit for a moment on what it means to be active with the body, because the way I see it, it means to pay attention to body sensation. It means to actually be beside whatever going on in my head. I'm talking with you, I hear, I can see my thoughts and reaction about what you're saying. At the same time, there is the opportunity to actually kind of put some attention to the fact that I'm sitting on a chair, and I feel that there is a little bit more weight on my right buttocks.
Yes, that's also, but I would do it by moving on the chair, by moving. Even by moving my eyes, exercises for the eyes, moving the sensory organs, any movement that actually causes an interaction with the world. It doesn't have to affect the world, but it causes the interaction by meaning that what you do affects what you perceive from the world. So if you move your eyes a lot, you perceive different things. This by itself increases activity. And this is kind of this part of this injection of energy into the system that may take you to another attraction.
Mm-hmm. That's extremely interesting, because I think we all brought up to be very much occupied with our thoughts, and when I'm saying thoughts,
partly, right? Partly, because we always balance the thoughts with action. So we have this kind of dualism.
Yeah, but maybe we need to elaborate a little bit about what we're talking when we say thoughts, because when we're thinking about expectations, when we're thinking about comparison, when we think about judgment, when we think about the future and the past, a lot of cognitive activities that, memory, just to remember and to bring knowledge in school and to do good, and there is a lot of emphasis on being cognitive and intellectually in the head advanced. And that it has its place.
Yeah, but I think it's a bit overrated in our society. Thinking and knowing and getting the knowledge and the know-how, etc., in terms of only cognitive functions. it's a little bit, or maybe more than a little bit, overrated, because it's only part. This is half of our. I mean, we are all social. We survive by being social groups. So an individual, no one is an island, says someone. We cannot survive if alone. Okay, we survive with part of the group. So this brain activity is crucial to our survival, and it's certainly has a lot of place in our life. But the brain-world interaction, which is all bodily, it's all via the body, is not less important. And I think we in the last, I don't know how long, but since maybe last centuries, is more and more emphasis of this IQ issues and intellectual and intelligence and cognitive. And my feeling is that we'll a little bit overrate them now. That's my feeling.
I think it's very, very interesting what you're saying, especially when, this intellectual world also brought us back to understand exactly the importance of how much communication, how much it's through the body, and how much we actually affect each other without even knowing, and the surrounding affect us. And I want to, kind of a little bit dive into the Polyvagal theory, because I think it's a very important part of this development of understanding how important it is to come back to our body, to kind of increase our attention to the situation and to the connection, and how do we affect each other, both in terms of what it does to our sense of safety, and in a way to kind of support healing process if it's body or psychological problems, and also in learning. How do we support learning, and how do we support productivity at workplace, like the interrelationship between people, how much we can actually learn by starting to understand that the body talks to us all the time.
I lost you.
Are you there? Well.
Okay, the chat. We lost the communication. Okay, now the channel is free for a while.
Yeah.
Can you say the last sentence again? I think it's back. So can you say the last sentence again?
Yeah, I think we slowly wake up to understand the importance of learning to listen that the body is talking to us, and that it gives us a lot of information and cues about what's going on and what's going on inside of us as a reaction to it. What you say?
Yeah, so the polyvagal theory. So thank you first, Shlomy, for introducing to me the polyvagal theory. I wasn't aware of it before, but it makes a lot of sense to me. And especially in the things that I study, this brain-world closed loop phenomena, because the vagal innovation indeed sits in a kind of unique situation in which it kind of interface between even conscious and cognitive functions and bodily functions. So all this ventral innervation of face muscles and all this, indeed a huge effect of the vagal nerve that can be influenced, for example, by breathing, as you taught me. And so by will, you can actually activate them by will. It may be indeed a kind of a bridge, a kind of a way in which you can interface between these two levels. We said the BB and the BW levels, that you are consciously aware to something, and then via the vagal innovation, you activate this brain-world closed loop interactions, which will help you getting out of this whatever locked in depressed situation. So I think in this case, indeed the vagus maybe the bridgehead to kind of get out of this situation. It makes a lot of sense to me.
I think the way I see this bridge is because you said that the body perceives the world in a way, and I think the polyvagal theory gives us a kind of a structure. What kind of coding this perception happening? I mean, it has kind of a law. It's to perceive cues of danger or safety, which actually, when you think about it, it's genius, because it's the body job to keep us alive, and the nervous system try to find a steadiness of surviving. And so I think that while we begin to see that we perceive the world automatically without us controlling it, but it has a certain order of how we perceive and how it's manifest in the body as a physiological platform, and then how it's shaped our thoughts and emotion, which leads back to...
Yeah, you talk about the other direction, which I agree. I know less about it. So one direction is to activate the vagal innovation in order to be involved with the world. And the other direction is to try to read out, so to speak. So to interpret the activations of the vagus that you have in order to know what's your condition, kind of. So I agree. I mean, everything is closed loop in my view. Everything works in both directions. I don't know much about this direction. It makes sense, but I don't know much about it.
I think I'm curious about the implications of it, because you also, in your work, you, as far as I understood, studying of how if everything is in closed loop, so how do we learn something new? You know, what does it take in order to learn a new material to bring to our repertoire of knowledge that we kind of accumulated through our life, the way life formed us? Can you tell something about it?
That's a great question. Actually, it's one of our research aims right now. We address it in several experimental directions. It's a great question. How do you learn a new thing in this closed loop scenario? The idea is, but we don't know yet if this is the way it works. The idea is that you form new attractors. So remember, we talked about these attractors, which is every closed loop has an attractor, or it should, at least they evolve in the way that the perceptual ones, that they have an attractor. So for example, your face may be an attractor for some of my loops, which means that when I start to move and wonder what I'm seeing, this loop of moving my eyes and sensing what I see can converge to either your face or to another face. It can converge to different attractors. So how do you learn new ones in this situation? There are some theories about how neural networks learn new attractors, etc. How do you learn with the closed loop scenario? It's an open question. We have to work with it.
For what I've learned from your work, it's got, again, back to what is your physical state when you introduce to a new cue for a new material. And if I'm trying to connect the Polyvagal theory, and in a way we know that with children, that the more safe children are, the less pressure and judgment there is on them, the more they're being met, and the more they're capable of being very shapeable. They're learning new things. As children, we did, but somehow along the way, life formed us, and the closed circle has become very kind of, this is safe, this is unsafe. And when we're safe, no good, I cannot learn anything new because there's something else taking place kind of geniusly to help me being safe. And if it's in the Polyvagal eyes, it's to mobilize to fight or flight, or if it's to shut down, then it's not an optimal condition to learn something. But if I am actually feel being met and connected, feeling safe, that means the ventral vagus, the social engagement system being activated, then I'm safe enough to let go of what I know in a way, not to protect myself, but to learn new material. Now, I think it's very, again, come back to how can we support each other? And Dr. Stephen Porges call it the co-regulation, that we can actually, because we kind of, right now, I'm a nervous system meeting your nervous system, the more I am in my social engagement activated, you know, and we kind of meet each other, the more we open up to learn something new. What do you say about that?
Okay, I'm afraid I will not have much to say about that. There are several things that make sense here, but they are remote from what we can study. Why they are remote? Because they involve two levels that are kind of distance one from the other. One is the general safety feeling, I'm calm and do I feel safe now in my environment? And the second is the specific perceptual learning. it makes sense that if you don't feel safe, then most of your energy goes to this safety thing. So you don't have energy in order to change anything in the perception. So nothing happens there. It makes sense. And once the other things, you know, your back is safe, and you know, okay, I got my army protecting me. I can learn now new things because I can direct my energy to study more perceptual things. So the life importance of the safety, the things that make you unsafe are very important to you. You must direct your energy there, and these are the more autonomous parts of the nervous system. And the less important things are if I learn a new phrase now or not. You know, okay, so I'll not learn a new phrase, but I'll survive. So it makes sense not to direct the energy to learning new details of the world if I'm not safe. It makes sense. But in terms of research, maybe actually on second thought, it's not so difficult to study. It can be studied. I don't know.
Because, you know, to give another example, you know, in Polyvagal theory was very largely embraced in the trauma world, because we know in trauma that it sits in the body remember, and the understanding is how can we help a person to kind of, first of all, access the body at all, because if we're talking about shutdown as a protection mechanism that happens mechanically, is that you're disassociate, you're coming out of the body. You don't want to be in a place where it's unpleasant. So one thing is to help people to understand what it means to sense the body, to support them. And another thing is that to learn to see, as you said, that the sensation, the moments it's all in movement. It's not stuck, even though it feels it's stuck. And then to realize that we have a narrative of what's going on with us and who's the blame and what's going on. So by learning and supporting a person to be tuned to the body, recognizing that what happens because this is what the body does geniusly to protect oneself. It might be unpleasant, it might be scary, but if you stay and have another person, if it's hands-on, if it's through mindfulness, there are different directions of being embodied with the unpleasantness of whatever sitting, stay with that, then it's helped to kind of, in a way, have a new narrative about what's going on and understanding, well, I couldn't do things otherwise. So a lot of big potion, chunk of, you know, the bad consciousness, the guilt that people have, why they didn't do the things they think now logically they're supposed to do, it's kind of beginning to go away, because they start sensing what's going on without going directly to this loop of what the narrative tells about it.
Yeah.
So they learn something new come in a little bit, but it's a long and hard process.
Yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense what you say, and I think it has to do with what you said before about safety. So let's say if you are synchronized with another person, let's say you're a therapist, and you have a body connection and synchronized and harmonized, etc., it provides you a lot of safety, right? You feel harmonized with the world. This is part of being safe. And then you can release some energy in order to induce some changes in the less important stuff. I think in terms of survival, the thinking, less self-guilty, or you blame yourself, why did I do this, why did I do that? In terms of survival, they are less important. So although we suffer from them a lot, but in terms of survival, they are less important. They kind of, what do you call this, adva on the waves, on the water. It's not the massive energy there. So in order to change this, change your thought, as I said before about perception, you must feel safe, you must feel harmonized, and then, okay, let's solve now this stupid thing with my guilt, etc., and fall to another attractor in which I'm not guilty, kind of in the thoughts. I think you have to vacate kind of a lot, to give a lot of safety feeling to the person, and then it can work on it.
So, and this is again, like you said before, we need another people. We need brain to brain. So that the
other people is a huge help with this thing of being connected to the world. If you're in yourself, kind of an island, you don't interact and nothing, there's no way you can get out of it. There's no way. It's like, you know, pulling your head from the hairs and then getting somewhere. Few people maybe can do it. Usually not. So if somebody from the world comes and then you have a connection, and this is a full connection because It's both the brain-brain connection because you talk to the person, and the brain world because you touch and you do synchronized things, etc. It must be strong. This is the strongest thing that we can get, I think.
It's kind of bring me back to where we started about how the East and the West slowly, I mean, they tell us we are not separate. And to begin to see, and that's what I love about the science that can actually support the understanding what's going on with us when we meet each other, and how can we help each other. We can regulate, we can actually take responsibility on our own state. That means that we connect it to our own breath, to our own body, and become kind of a very stable, kind of a help from outside to help the person to meet the scary way of being within oneself, and kind of, okay, we're in it together. And this is a very, very clear way that this connection is actually a contribution to our well-being and to our ability to let go of a closed story and to be kind of more flexible and adaptable to from moment to moment. So it can start with co-regulation, but eventually the whole idea is to learn also to do self-regulation, because, you know, we all the time meet challenges.
Yeah, I think this is an important, must be an important factor, the convincing ourselves that we live in a dynamic world and not static. Because if you live in a static world, this is a cognitive state. So as I said, it's kind of not of survival importance, but of suffering importance. So if you think that you live in a static world, then you can be locked in a state and you say, I'm guilty, I made a mistake, that's it, okay, I'm done. If you internalize that you live in a dynamic world, you know that it's meaningless. I mean, the world is fluctuating. It's kind of a chaotic process. So the fact that you made a mistake here, and now time evolves and all the world is now chaotic, there's no effect on what you do now. You can reinvent yourself, you can start everything. There's no meaning to what you did there in the real world because it's dynamic and chaotic in a way. There's no, the effect of something that you did a year ago on what you do now is zero. It's a whole world maybe in your thought because you remember it, but in the practical world, it's zero. There's no way it can affect.
But I think this is, again, an interesting thing to see, that it's never only in the thought, because it's coming back to our experience of safety, which means that it comes back to the body, and we feel the traction. We feel basically we're stuck. And, you know, in Polyvagal, they talked about being either in kind of alertness, and we can see it with PTSD, you know, being in hyperarousal all the time, seeing danger and looking for danger, even though it's not there, or in depression when there is like a lack of energy. So it's really from the head manifest to the body, but it's actually from the body manifest. It goes all the way. And so, yes, it happened in the past, but it's affect how I see myself in the moment. So meeting in the moment through the body, I think what's important is that not convince myself that everything is temporal, is actually to understand the reality that is temporal, and that I can let go, but we need help because we never learned that. This is what we can.
Yeah, and also you remind me, also, of course, I mean, what I said is limited to not highly traumatic effects, like if you lose your leg, you lost your leg a year ago, and then you lost your leg, you don't get your leg back. So the world is not dynamic in that far. It's a dynamic in the social interaction and how much you interact with the world, etc. This is very dynamic. But of course, things happen that do not come back. I mean, this we have to admit. So if the trauma is kind of something that irreversible that happened to the body, then what I said about dynamics doesn't hold there, of course. Mm-hmm.
It's very fascinating. I mean, I think that your work is so important, and the work of people like Porges, because we need to, it seems like it's like a big puzzle, you know, of bricks here and there. And how do we help to see the connections?
Yeah,
you know?
That's the huge challenge. Right? We all, I mean, we can, my belief is we cannot, I mean, as individual persons, we cannot really see the whole picture. There's no case that we can do it. But as a society, like every one of us capture something in a society, we do advance. I mean, the methods that you people are devising and developing, and so it's an effort, it's a collective effort of people. It's not a single mind that come, okay, I know the solution and this is the way it works. But once we are open and we explore and we know how to filter the nonsense from the kind of the consistent things, then things move on, move forward, and
I think it's so important what you say about this collaboration, because I mean, there is great work going on in laboratories around the world, but I think that to be able to find applications in our everyday life, the way we relate to our children, from this point of understanding of a little bit bigger way of seeing oneself, education, healthcare system. I mean, the communication between a doctor and a patient, or a nurse and a patient, can change radically if we realize that the meeting itself has opportunity to change the biological state, which in turn will support the healing process. And the same way it could be applied in the workplace. I mean, we want productivity, we want creativity, but those things won't come if we kind of pressure people. It's about how much we create a space for being able to make mistakes and to learn and to understand more and more about how we structure and how we can inspire each other.
fully agree.
All right, I think my head wants to go to a different direction, but I think it's a lot of material there, won't you say?
Yeah, sure. We can keep on talking, but for today, I think we covered a lot of topics.
Professor Ahissar, thank you so much for your time and your wisdom, and I hope we'll have the same conversation on a different topics another time, perhaps.
Yeah, sure. And thank you, Shlomy, and keep up the good work. I think it's crucially important to us, to human society, it's going in the right direction, what you're doing. It's great.
Thank you. So until next time, goodbye.
Okay, bye. Thank you.